So I'm with Dr. Seán Crosson. So Doctor, could you tell us a bit about the Hollywood and hurling?
Well, what it is it's a collection of short films that were made between the early 1930s and the late 1950s. And they depict, I suppose, to some extent, the changing and evolving nature of the representation of Irish America in film. In microcosm, in a small way. I mean, Irish America is better known through the feature films and through actors in the 30s through the 50s like James Cagney, Pat O'Brien, Spencer Tracy and so on. But in a small way we can see, I think, in these hurling shorts the evolution of Irish identity and its depiction in these films that we're going to be showing tonight.
And what's the earliest footage that you have?
The earliest footage that we have is from 1931. And there's also footage from 1932, both of which are related. It's from two sports series that were narrated by a seminal American broadcaster called Ted Hoosing, who is to American broadcasting what Micheál O'Hare is to Irish broadcasting in terms of sports coverage. And in 1931 he covered the visit of the Tipperary hurling team to the US. At that time they were then All-Ireland champions. And in 1932 he filmed a number of games in between Irish American teams played in New York. So that's where it begins, and that is, I think, some of the most questionable representations in terms of how he describes the games, in terms of how he depicts the hurling and the aspects of the game that he focuses on. That was followed in 1936 by an MGM short called Hurling, which was part of a series of shorts called Pete Smith Specialities. These were among the most popular shorts made by Hollywood between the 1930s and 1950s. And that is a more comic turn on hurling. It uses a lot of offensive descriptions for hurling, like Ireland's athletic assault to battering and so on. However, it's done in a very kind of slapstick way, and it works within. Pete Smith made shorts about American football, baseball, basketball and so on, all of which equally were playing up the comic potential within it, sometimes using violence, sometimes using slapstick, and there's a combination of all of that, I think, within this hurling film.
So the footage, although may appear to be slightly racist toward Irish hurling, especially the earlier footage, that kind of approach was taken in other sports, is that correct?
Yeah, well, particularly the Pete Smith Specialities, but throughout, I mean, between the 20s and the 30s, you had four of the most famous films from that period were Har Lloyd's The Freshman, the Marx Brothers, Horse Feathers, Buster Keaton's College. You had from 1931 Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, all of which use sport for comic reasons, whether it was boxing or American football or field sports. So it worked within that context where sport was seen as an opportunity for a laugh, for a bit of crack. And it is undoubtedly, if you look at them individually and out of context, they are incredibly poor representations and indeed offensive representations of hurling. But within a different context, within American and Irish American representations in the period, I think they function quite differently. And I think to describe them as racist is probably a little too strong, insofar as that the violence is rarely depicted in a threatening or in a kind of a dangerous context. It's more about slapstick, the way in which we see violence portrayed, say, in Charlie Chaplin or in Har Lloyd or in the Marx Brothers. Okay,
so the footage tonight, would that be aimed at hurlers, people that love hurling, or would it be more for the movie enthusiasts? Do you think people that are really into the hurling may become offensive if they look at it in the wrong light?
It's not really for people who are interested in seeing the sport of hurling played as it should be and can be played. These are not the films to watch. These films are records of, to some extent, unfortunately, but yet unfortunately as far as we still have them, they are the only records, the only moving image records we have of hurling from this period, because really hurling and Gaelic football only began to be filmed from the late 1940s on in Ireland in terms of indigenous National Film Institute and then the setting up of RTE in 1962. So these are the only. So in one respect, as historical documents, they're crucial because you have footage of the Tipperary team from 1930, which we have no other footage of. In terms of moving image footage, there's also newsreel footage from '34 of the Kilkenny team visiting the US that'll be shown tonight. The only footage we have, and there's very little footage of players like Lowry Marr, for example, Martin White, and so on. You know, legendary figures within Kilkenny hurling, but these are among the only few images we have. And while we might watch them and say, my God, you know, how can they describe the game like that? Yet, on one side, it's unfortunate that they are depicted that way, but on the other side, it's fortunate we have it, because otherwise we would have no moving image footage of these players.
And have you had much response from the families of these former players? That they must be excited.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I doubt that a lot of people are aware of this. Now, I did speak here previously 2 years ago in Kilkenny on another session around GA and prior to the centenary, just with 3 other speakers. But in that session I did, subsequent to it, and I spoke more about the development of the indigenous, as in Irish depictions of Gaelic games. And there were quite a few people who at the end came up and said, do you know of any footage of such and such a game? So I noticed a huge amount of interest. Whether or not they will find, I think they will find them interesting from that point of view. The later film now from 1955, the Three Kisses film, is focused more on Cork hurling, so it's probably less of Kilkenny. Well, I suppose in terms of it features most of that kind of dominant, what was one of the dominant teams in the 50s in playing and training, so it is of important historical importance as much as anything.
Is that why
else.
the Three Kisses seems to be getting a bit of the limelight at the moment? It's a very well-known piece. Is that because of the era?
Yeah, I think so. And there are so few in that period from prior to the advent of RT. We've so few representations of these teams and of these players. So to find footage like that, even when it's presented in often questionable, condescending ways, is still important, because it is really the only footage we have.
And how did you get the footage then?
I've been doing research around this for a couple of years, which it basically began over a couple of pints in a pub in Galway, and someone said to me, has Gaelic games ever been featured in film? And that journey kind of began with looking at feature films, and I'll be talking briefly about it tonight in terms of feature films, just at the beginning, but it actually appears more in feature films than people realise, but they tend to be quite brief, the references. And then as that kind of research developed, I found that actually there were short films that had been made between the 30s and 50s, and I managed to track them down through research online and through contacting archives in America to an archive in Madison, Wisconsin, that held most of the films that you're going to see tonight, and they've only been recently acquired by the Irish Film Institute subsequent to that research. And this is, although someone said one of them was shown last night on the Sunday game, so they're getting out there, and they're available. And if you don't see it here in Kilkenny, they're also available in the Irish Film Institute in Dublin to watch.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Crosson.